In the peaceful setting of a grand mansion, Esmeralda, a loving wife, anticipates the arrival of her child, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Her husband, Raul, torn between ambition and duty, hides a dark secret that threatens their lives. As night falls, the whispers of betrayal echo through the halls, leading to a series of choices that will change everything. What begins as a tale of love and joy quickly spirals into a harrowing journey of heartbreak, deception, and a battle for survival. But in the darkest moments, the strength of a mother's love and the power of destiny set the stage for a dramatic twist, where justice, revenge, and the will to protect her children emerge as the guiding forces. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. Kelly, my love, just hold on a little longer. Soon we will finally be together, he murmured, his voice filled with a strange blend of determination and shame. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous mixture of ambition and remorse as he ended the call, abruptly silencing the secretive conversation when he heard his wife's soft footsteps approaching the room. Raul, darling, who were you speaking with just now? Esmeralda asked, her innocent smile masking the suspicion lingering in her gaze. Nothing but business, my love, as always, he replied smoothly, kissing her forehead tenderly. But while he feigned calmness, his thoughts were racing. Miles away, in a dimly lit office hidden in the heart of the city, Don Alfonso Velázquez, Esmeralda's powerful father, furrowed his brow as troubling news reached his ears. Keep a close watch on Raul. I don't trust that man, he commanded coldly to the figure standing beside him, a man shrouded in the shadows of a dark suit. As the night deepened, the Montero mansion buzzed with activity. During dinner, Esmeralda excitedly chattered about her elaborate plans for the baby's nursery, her joy palpable. But Raul barely heard her, his mind preoccupied with the hidden suitcase in his car trunk and the plane ticket burning a hole in his wallet. Not far away, in a quaint cafe, Kelly, a woman of breathtaking beauty with eyes like a cat's, checked her watch impatiently. Tomorrow, she whispered to herself, tomorrow our new life begins. None of them had any inkling that their fates were on a collision course, bound to intertwine in ways they could never have foreseen. The Velázquez family empire, an empire built on secrets and treacherous alliances, was on the brink of a seismic shift. As darkness enveloped the city, a shadowy figure slipped through the gardens of the Montero mansion unseen. The game was now in motion, a deadly game where love, betrayal, and power would wage a relentless battle. As the early morning hours crept in, an unexpected twist unfolded. Esmeralda awoke with a jolt, clutching the silky sheets in pain. Raul, the baby is coming, she gasped between the intense contractions. Raul, his face drained of color, rushed to help his wife, his heart heavy with the guilt and anxiety tearing him apart. At that very moment, his phone buzzed insistently. It was Kelly. Where are you? The flight leaves in 3 hours, the message read. At the hospital, chaos erupted. Shadou's losing too much blood, a nurse shouted urgently as they hurried down the corridor. Esmeralda, barely conscious, reached out for Raul's hand, but he remained rooted in place, paralyzed by his indecision. Don Alfonso received the news with a stormy expression. I am coming right away, he growled into the phone, and find that worthless Raul. Meanwhile, in the sterile waiting room, Raul stared at his phone, torn between Kelly and Esmeralda, between his future and his obligations. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with dread, he made the decision that would seal his fate. I am sorry, Esmeralda, he whispered under his breath as he bolted from the hospital. In the operating room, the doctors fought desperately to save both mother and child. She is going into shock, the lead surgeon warned. We need more blood immediately. Don Alfonso stormed into the hospital like a force of nature. Where's my daughter? He demanded, his voice filled with fury. Not seeing Raul, his expression darkened further. Find him now, he barked. Outside, the city slowly came to life, oblivious to the drama that was unfolding within the hospital walls. A taxi sped toward the airport, carrying Raul and his dreams of escaping to a new life. In the hospital's intensive care unit, Esmeralda clung to life by a thread, utterly unaware of the betrayal that had shattered her world. Her heart monitor beeped erratically, a haunting prelude to the turmoil that lay ahead. The roar of the plane's engines drowned out Raoul's guilty conscience as he settled into his seat beside Kelly. She smiled triumphantly, her hand sliding into his in a gesture of victory. "Finally alone, my love," she whispered as the first glimpse of the Caribbean coastline came into view. Back in the hospital, a cacophony of beeps and frantic voices filled the air as doctors worked tirelessly to save Esmeralda. Pale as death itself, she lay unconscious in the ICU bed, while the medical team, drenched in sweat, fought to pull her back from the brink. Don Alfonso, his face a mask of fury and fear, paced the waiting room, his mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. "You will pay for this, Raoul," he vowed through gritted teeth, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. At that moment, Maria, Esmeralda's closest friend, burst into the room, her eyes swollen and red from crying, desperately seeking answers from Don Alfonso's grim expression. "How are she and the baby?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. In the shadows of the hallway, the man in the dark suit watched the scene unfold. With a discreet movement, he pulled out his phone and sent a message shrouded in mystery. "The dove is in the nest. The hawk has flown." In her unconscious state, Esmeralda drifted through a world of surreal visions. Happy memories from her childhood intertwined with foreboding images of the future. She saw Raoul walking away, heard the cries of babies, and felt the oppressive presence of a dark shadow looming over everything. Suddenly, a cry pierced the tension in the operating room. "We have a pulse," a nurse exclaimed, relief washing over the team. Esmeralda's life still hung by a thread, but she clung to it with a tenacity born of desperation. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean, far removed from the tragedy they had left behind, Raoul and Kelly toasted with champagne. But as the bubbles danced in his glass, a shadow of doubt flickered across Raoul's face, as if he could feel the crushing weight of his actions bearing down on him. Night descended upon the city, casting an eerie calm over the chaos that had unfolded. In the shadows, unseen forces began to stir, weaving a web of intrigue that would soon ensnare everyone involved. In the hospital, the piercing cries of newborn twins shattered the early morning silence. "Twins," the exhausted doctor announced with a weary smile, "a boy and a girl." But the joy was fleeting, for Esmeralda remained locked in a deep, unyielding coma. Don Alfonso, his face haggard with worry and exhaustion, gazed at his grandchildren through the glass of the nursery. His phone vibrated suddenly, breaking the silence. "We've found them," a voice on the other end reported. "They aired on a secluded beach in the Caribbean." Maria, her eyes red from endless tears and sleepless nights, rummaged through Esmeralda's purse in search of answers. Among the cosmetics and scattered papers, she found something that sent chills down her spine: a photograph of Raoul, locked in a passionate kiss with an unknown woman. "Oh, Esmeralda," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow, "how long have you known?" Meanwhile, on a pristine beach bathed in the morning sun, Raoul awoke with a gnawing sense of unease. The sight of Kelly peacefully sleeping beside him could not chase away the haunting image of Esmeralda that now plagued his dreams. Suddenly, Kelly sat up, her face drained of color and her hands trembling. "Raoul," she began, her voice quivering with fear, "there's something I need to tell you. I am pregnant." The revelation struck Raoul like a lightning bolt, his mind reeling from the shock. His conscience, already burdened by guilt, now felt the crushing weight of this new reality. As he struggled to process the bombshell, his eyes caught sight of a shadowy figure lurking in the distance, a camera lens glinting in the sunlight, capturing their every move. Back at the hospital, a cluster of doctors stood around Esmeralda's bed, their expressions somber. "Her condition has stabilized, but the coma remains," one of them informed Don Alfonso with a measured tone. "The coming days will be critical." Don Alfonso, his face a mask of stoic concern, nodded gravely before stepping aside to make a phone call. "I want them to feel the chill of fear down to their bones," he ordered with icy resolve, his voice a cold whisper of vengeance. As night fell once more, a violent storm gathered on the Caribbean horizon, a storm that mirrored the tumultuous days that lay ahead. In the hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of Esmeralda's monitors filled the silence, each beep a testament to her enduring fight for life. With the dawn came a fragile glimmer of hope. Esmeralda's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused and dazed as she blinked against the dim light. Panic gripped her as memories came rushing back. "My baby," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Maria, who had kept vigil by her side through the night, leaned in, her smile trembling with both relief and sorrow. "There are two, Esmeralda. You gave birth to twins," she said softly. But the joy in her voice was tinged with sadness as she added, "Esmeralda, Raul." The weight of reality crashed down on Esmeralda like a tidal wave, and tears spilled down her cheeks as she began to comprehend her husband's betrayal. "I knew," she choked out, her voice thick with pain, "but I didn't want to believe it." At that moment, Don Alfonso entered the room, his usually stern face betraying a rare blend of relief and barely contained fury. "My dearest child," he murmured, carefully wrapping his arms around her, "I have taken steps. He will pay dearly for what he has done." Meanwhile, far away in the Caribbean, Raul awoke with a start, his heart pounding. A mysterious envelope had been slipped under the door of his hotel room. His hands shook as he tore it open, revealing photos of himself and Kelly, accompanied by a chilling note, "Savor your last moments, peace." The blood drained from Raul's face as dread settled deep within him, turning the sun-soaked paradise into a sinister prison. Back at the hospital, Maria found the strength to show Esmeralda the damning evidence of Raul's infidelities. Each photograph, each message, felt like a dagger stabbing at Esmeralda's heart. But instead of succumbing to despair, something fierce ignited within her. "No more tears," Esmeralda declared, her voice steady as she sat up in bed. "My children need me to be strong." Don Alfonso watched his daughter with a mix of pride and deep concern. He knew that the battles ahead would be brutal, but he also recognized the unyielding strength within her, a strength that would guide her through the storm. Yet none of them could foresee the twists of fate that were about to be unleashed, bringing changes that would alter their lives forever. The whispers of threats spread like wildfire through the Caribbean paradise, shattering the fragile peace Raul and Kelly had sought. They packed their bags in a frantic rush, fear palpable in every hurried movement. "We need to go back to Mexico," Raul insisted, his voice strained and his face ashen with anxiety. Meanwhile, Esmeralda's slow recovery began to gather momentum. A nurse with gentle eyes named Lucia entered her room, bringing a sense of calm with her presence. "It is time to meet your baby," Lucia said with a warm, encouraging smile. Something in Lucia's kindness resonated deeply with Esmeralda, and soon, a fragile trust began to blossom between them. In his office, Don Alfonso received news that sent a shiver down his spine. "Sir, there's been a leak," one of his trusted men reported, his voice tinged with urgency. "Someone has betrayed our plans for retribution." Don Alfonso's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Find the traitor," he commanded in a voice as cold as ice. Maria, determined to help, immersed herself in research on the twins' rare medical condition. Her search led her to a cutting-edge experimental treatment in Switzerland, but the cost was staggering. "How will we ever afford this?" she wondered aloud, her heart heavy with the weight of the impossible challenge before them. At the bustling airport, Raul and Kelly stepped onto a plane destined for Mexico, their hearts weighed down by the gravity of recent events. As the plane ascended, Raul felt a deep, gnawing remorse take hold of him, each second in the air intensifying his internal conflict. Beside him, Kelly's anxiety grew more palpable, her fingers clutching his arm with increasing desperation. "What if they are already waiting for us?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger to manifest at any moment. Back in the sterile, whitewashed walls of the hospital, the atmosphere was drastically different. Lucia, the ever-dedicated nurse, carefully positioned the fragile babies in Esmeralda's arms, allowing her to hold them for the first time. The moment was filled with tender emotion, a small beacon of hope amidst the swirling chaos that had engulfed their lives. But this brief respite was shattered when Esmeralda's phone buzzed insistently. The voice on the other end belonged to her lawyer, his tone urgent as he informed her of disturbing movements in her family's financial accounts. It was a warning, a sign that the storm was far from over. Esmeralda's heart raced as she cradled her newborns closer, her mind made up in an instant. "I want to start the divorce proceedings," she said, her voice resolute and filled with a newfound determination. I have to protect my children from all of this, no matter the cost. However, what Esmeralda didn't know was that Lucia, the nurse who had been by her side, was concealing her dark secrets. As Lucia left the room, she discreetly pulled out her phone, her fingers typing out a message that hinted at a hidden agenda. The lioness has awakened, the plan is still on track. As night descended upon the city, it brought with it an air of foreboding, a sense that something sinister was brewing in the shadows. The darkness crept into every corner, including the luxurious confines of Raoul's home. Unseen by the world, 4 hooded figures emerged from the shadows, their movements precise and deliberate. They encircled the house like predators stalking their prey, their presence instilling a chilling sense of dread that seeped through the very walls. At the same time, in the quiet halls of the hospital, Esmeralda, supported by her friend Maria, signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand, her eyes betraying a steely resolve. This is what's best for my children, she whispered to herself, as if trying to convince her heart of the truth. But fate had other plans, and the tendrils of destiny were winding tighter around all those involved. Meanwhile, Kelly, her face ashen and her body drenched in cold sweat, stumbled through the emergency room doors. Her voice, filled with terror, echoed through the hospital. Help! Something is wrong with the baby. Raoul followed closer behind, his face a mask of panic as he froze upon recognizing where they were, the same hospital where he had abandoned Esmeralda without a second thought. The weight of his past sins crashed down on him like an avalanche, leaving him paralyzed with regret. Lucia, the nurse, rushed to respond to the emergency call. But as she approached Kelly, her eyes widened, a spark of recognition igniting in them. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze as Lucia and Kelly locked eyes, both women realizing that their lives were far more intertwined than either had known. Elsewhere in the hospital, on a floor far removed from the chaos, Maria received a call that would turn her world upside down. The voice on the other end belonged to the private detective she had hired, his tone grave. "Madam," he began, "I have uncovered something about Raoul's past, something that will change everything. But I can discuss it over the phone. We need to meet, and soon." Across town, Don Alfonso, blissfully unaware of the turmoil unfolding at the hospital, was in a meeting of his own. He sat in a dimly lit room, surrounded by men who were loyal only to him. His voice was cold, devoid of any emotion, as he issued a command. "I want him to suffer," he said, the words dripping with malice. But Don didn't lay a finger on him just yet. Back in the hospital, Raoul came face to face with Maria. The air between them was thick with tension, words unsaid hanging heavily in the silence. "She's here, isn't she?" Raoul's voice was barely more than a whisper, but it was laced with desperation. Maria's eyes, filled with a contempt that was years in the making, met his. "You've destroyed more lives than you could ever comprehend," she replied, her voice steady, but brimming with the weight of unspoken accusations. As the night wore on, the threads of destiny wove themselves into an inescapable web, pulling everyone closer to the inevitable moment of truth. Raoul, now cornered in his opulent living room, found himself surrounded by the mercenaries, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to find a way out. "Wait," he stammered, his voice trembling with fear. "I have information, something that could bring down Don Alfonso." The mercenaries exchanged glances, their interest piqued by Raoul's desperate plea. Back at the hospital, Esmeralda, with Maria by her side, walked with purpose toward Kelly's room. Every step was heavy with the burden of the decisions she knew she had to make. When they finally entered the room, time seemed to come to a standstill. Kelly, lying in the bed, looked up, her face pale and full of fear. Esmeralda's gaze locked onto Kelly's, her voice surprisingly calm as she spoke. "So you dare the woman my husband abandoned us for?" Kelly's eyes welled up with tears as she nodded, her guilt evident in every fiber of her being. "Esmeralda, I am so sorry, I never intended to." Her voice trailed off, choked with emotion. But before the conversation could go any further, Lucia entered the room, her demeanor suddenly shifting. Her eyes flicked between Kelly and Esmeralda, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "Kelly," she began, her voice shaking, don't you recognize me?" Kelly's brow furrowed in confusion before realization dawned on her. Shock washed over her features as she gasped, "Lucia, my sister." Maria and Esmeralda watched in stunned silence as the two women, once separated by years and secrets, embraced each other, their reunion marked by tears and whispered apologies. Meanwhile, in his office, Don Alfonso received a call that sent a shiver down his spine. "Sir," the voice on the other end was filled with panic. "The federal investigation is closing in. We believe there's a mole in our organization." Don Alfonso's expression hardened, his mind racing. "Find the traitor," he ordered, his voice deadly serious, "and initiate the contingency plan. No one is going to destroy what I've built." Back at Raul's home, the mercenaries listened intently as he revealed more details about Don Alfonso's operations. One of them pulled out a phone and made a call, his voice low and urgent. "Boss, I think you need to hear this yourself." As the morning sun began to rise, secrets long buried started to surface, threatening to upend the lives of everyone involved. The city was oblivious to the drama playing out within the hospital walls, where lives were being irrevocably changed. Maria, her face drawn with exhaustion, held a stack of papers as she entered Esmeralda's room. "Eve, I found something," she said, her voice trembling. "There's an experimental treatment in Switzerland for the twins' condition." But she hesitated, biting her lip. "The cost is astronomical, millions of dollars." Esmeralda felt the weight of the world crash down on her as she sat by her baby's cribs, the once unshakable security of her family fortune now seeming like a distant memory. Meanwhile, Raul, his mind reeling from the revelations of the past few hours, made a decision that he knew would change everything. With hesitant steps, he approached Esmeralda's room, his heart heavy with guilt and desperation. "Esmeralda," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but our children, they need you. They need you all the help we can give them. I want to help if you'll let me." Before Esmeralda could respond, Lucia burst into the room, her face a storm of emotions. "Kelly wants to speak with both of you," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. Across the city, the mercenaries received new instructions from their enigmatic leader. Change of plans, came the distorted voice on the other end of the line. "The mission has evolved. Keep everyone under surveillance, but do not engage until further notice." Back in the hospital, Kelly, her voice trembling and eyes brimming with tears, revealed a heart-wrenching secret to Esmeralda and Raul. "My pregnancy is high risk," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors say I have to choose my life or the baby does." The room fell into a heavy silence, the enormity of her words sinking in. Esmeralda, despite everything she had been through, felt a pang of compassion for Kelly. Raul, on the other hand, seemed to age a decade at that moment, the weight of his past decisions bearing down on him with crushing force. At the same time, Don Alfonso, far from the chaos of the hospital, was suddenly stricken with a heart attack. As he was rushed to the emergency room, his assistants scrambled to maintain control of his empire, the foundations of which were beginning to crumble. Night had fully fallen over the city, cloaking the hospital in shadows thick with secrets. Esmeralda, her face etched with fatigue and worry, gazed out of the window, her mind swirling with the gravity of the choices she had to make. The door to her room creaked open, and Lucia stepped in, her expression somber. "Esmeralda," she began, her voice quiet but firm, "there's something you need to know, something that will change everything you thought you knew about your family." Meanwhile, in the hallway, Raul was confronted with a brutal truth. Kelly, tears streaming down her face, confessed, "Raul, the baby isn't yours." "I'm so sorry." The floor seemed to drop out from under him as her words hit him like a sledgehammer. Every decision he had made, every sacrifice, now felt meaningless, based on a lie. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, utterly defeated. In another part of the hospital, Don Alfonso awoke in the intensive care unit, his body weak but his mind sharp. Summoning what strength he had left, he called for his assistant. "Execute the Omega plan," he rasped. "It is time to end this." The mercenaries, who had been keeping a close watch on the hospital, received a cryptic message. Their faces, hidden beneath their hoods, remained unreadable as they read the new orders. "So this is the real game," one of them muttered under his breath. "So be it." Oblivious to the danger closing in, Maria, deep in her investigations, discovered something that took her breath away. She raced through the hospital corridors, desperate to find Esmeralda. "The twins," she cried out. "There's something special about them." In Esmeralda's room, Lucia had just finished revealing her dark secret. Esmeralda stared at her, disbelief etched across her features. "This cannot be true," she murmured. "That would mean my entire life has been a lie." Lucia nodded solemnly. "It is true, Esmeralda, and there's more, much more. We are on the brink of something that could change not just our lives, but the future of many." As the night deepened, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The truth, long hidden, was about to be exposed, and with it, the fate of everyone involved teetered on a knife's edge. The early hours of dawn found Esmeralda in a state of fevered agitation. Lucia, these revelations had shaken her to the core, leaving her to grapple with the enormity of it all. But within her, a fierce determination was building. She turned to Maria, her eyes blazing with resolve. "I am going to sell everything," she declared, her voice unwavering. "The mansion, the jewelry, the stocks, everything. My children are worth it." Raoul, meanwhile, was unraveling under the weight of his guilt and desperation. His thoughts spiraled as he concocted a plan that was as dangerous as it was desperate. "If I can have them," he muttered to himself, "at least I can make sure they are safe." His hands shook as he began to write a ransom note, the words a stark reflection of his unraveling sanity. In the intensive care unit, Don Alfonso was visited by men who were anything but ordinary. 4 figures in suits, their badges hidden, entered his room with quiet authority. Don Alfonso Velasquez, one of them, spoke in a low, menacing tone, with Interpol. "At this time we had a conversation." At the same time, Lucia found herself torn between the loyalty she owed to the organization that had trained her and the affection she had developed for Esmeralda and her children. She retreated to a secluded corner of the hospital and made a call. "Boss," she whispered into the phone, "the situation has changed. The children, they are more important than we thought." In her room, Kelly received a visit from a doctor who brought more bad news. "Your condition is more complicated than we anticipated," he told her, his voice grave. "We need to make some critical decisions, and we need to make them soon." Maria, in her relentless pursuit of answers, stumbled upon information that left her speechless. The results of the twins' genetic tests were extraordinary, something that could revolutionize modern medicine. As dawn approached, the atmosphere in the hospital became charged with tension. Everyone, from the patients to the staff, felt the weight of something monumental hanging in the air. Esmeralda, with her babies nestled in her arms, looked out at the city that was just beginning to wake up. "No matter what happens," she whispered to her children, her voice filled with quiet determination, "I will protect you even if I have to take on the whole world." The morning light filtered through the hospital windows, casting a golden hue over the worn features of Don Alfonso's face. The visit from the Interpol agents had left him on high alert, every nerve in his body tingling with anticipation. With shaky hands, he dialed a number on his phone. "Emilio," he whispered urgently, "activate the emergency protocol. We need to safeguard the legacy at all costs." In the hospital cafeteria, Maria sat across from the private detective she had hired, his nervous demeanor betraying the gravity of what what I vow to reveal. "What I've uncovered about Raoul is deeply disturbing," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "But there's something much bigger at play here. Someone powerful is pulling the strings." Before Maria could open the envelope, a sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. Kelly, her face ashen, had collapsed outside her room. Doctors and nurses rushed to her aid as Raoul watched, paralyzed by guilt and fear. At that moment, Lucia appeared at Esmeralda's side, her eyes filled with fierce determination. "Esmeralda," she said firmly, "there is something you need to know about your children, their condition. It is not a disease, it is a gift." Esmeralda looked at her, bewildered and overwhelmed by the deluge of revelations. But before she could process Lucia these words, an alarm blared through the hospital. "Code blue in room 35, The announcement echoed through the corridors of Don Alfonso's room. Chaos ensued as the staff scrambled to respond. Amidst the turmoil, a man in a dark suit slipped unnoticed into the nursery where the twins lay. Maria, witnessing the chaos, tried to make her way to Esmeralda, only to be stopped by a firm hand on her shoulder. She turned to find herself face to face with one of the Interpol agents. "Mapam," he said gravely, "we need you to come with us. This is a matter of national security." As the pieces of this intricate and dangerous game began to align, it became clear that the lives of everyone involved were about to be irrevocably altered. The dawn of a new day brought with it the promise of revelation and the threat of ruin, as each character stood on the precipice of a fate they could neither foresee nor escape. Amidst the chaos that consumed the hospital, Esmeralda clung to her children with a fierce determination, her eyes gleaming with a potent mix of fear and resolve. She drew them close, her voice trembling as she whispered a vow. "No one will tear us apart." Little did she know the forces converging around her were about to challenge that promise in ways she could never have foreseen. The tension in the air was palpable as Raoul, his face twisted with panic, burst into the nursery. His eyes darted frantically, searching for the twins. When they finally landed on the cribs, his desperation reached its peak. "I have to get them out of here," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he approached with hesitant steps. But before he could reach the children, a figure emerged from the shadows. Lucia, with surprising swiftness, positioned herself between Raoul and the cribs, her voice dripping with menace as she warned, "Not another step." Raoul recoiled, stunned by the transformation of the once kind nurse. "You don't understand," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "They are in danger, we all are." But Lucia stood her ground, unwavering in her resolve. Meanwhile, Esmeralda was confronted with an agonizing choice. Don Alfonso, still weak from his recent heart attack, had just revealed a shocking truth: his deep ties to the drug trade. "Daughter," he rasped, his voice frail but urgent, "you must choose. Expose my dealings to save your children, or stay silent to preserve the family's legacy." Esmeralda's heart pounded in her chest as she weighed her options, torn between love for her children and loyalty to her family. At that moment, Maria burst into the room, breathless and followed closely by Interpol agents. "Esmeralda," she gasped, "there's a larger conspiracy at play. Your children are the key to everything." The agents, their expressions unreadable, watched silently, awaiting Esmeralda's decision. Outside, in the hallway, Kelly was fighting to stay conscious as doctors rushed her to intensive care. "The baby," she whispered faintly, "you have to save it." Back in the nursery, Lucia received a cryptic message on her phone. As she read it, her eyes widened in shock. "Change of plans," she muttered under her breath, the gravity of the situation dawning on her. The storm that had been brewing for days was now erupting in full force, threatening to unravel everything. Each choice, each secret that surfaced, held the power to alter not just the lives of those involved, but potentially the course of history itself. Esmeralda, with tears brimming in her eyes, glanced from her father to Maria, and then towards the nursery where her innocent children slept, unaware of the maelstrom engulfing them. The weight of the world seemed to rest on her slender shoulders as she finally found her voice. But before she could speak, a tropical storm unleashed its fury upon the city, its howling winds rattling the hospital's windows. The lights flickered ominously, plunging the hallways into darkness until the emergency generators roared to life. Amidst the chaos, Esmeralda stood in Don Alfonso's room, her heart torn between the conflicting demands of family loyalty and her children's future. With a trembling yet determined voice, she finally declared, "Dad, I love you, but I cannot continue down this path. My children deserve a life free from shadows." Don Alfonso, a mix of pride and resignation washing over his weathered face, slowly nodded. "I understand, my child. Perhaps at this time we seek redemption for our past sins." As if on cue, a deafening clap of thunder reverberated through the hospital, the lights flickering once more. Seizing the momentary confusion, Raoul managed to slip away from Lucia's watchful gaze. sprinting towards the emergency exit with a suspiciously bulky backpack slung over his shoulder. Driven by instinct, Maria chased after him, her heart pounding with urgency. "Stop," she shouted, her voice echoing down the corridor. In the struggle that ensued, something tumbled from Raul's backpack. Maria picked it up, her hands trembling as she realized the significance of its contents. This can't be true," she murmured, her voice laced with disbelief. Meanwhile, in the intensive care unit, Kelly was on the brink of giving birth, with Lucia by her side, deploying every ounce of her medical skill to keep mother and child alive. "Hang in there, Kelly," Lucia urged, her mind torn between her mission and the fragile life fighting to be born. Back in Don Alfonso's room, the elderly patriarch, summoning his last reserves of strength, made a final fateful call. "It is time," he said gravely into the phone. "Activate the Omega Protocol. May God forgive us." The Interpol agents, alerted by a signal on their devices, exchanged concerned glances. "Mrs. Montero," one of them spoke urgently, "we must evacuate you and your children immediately." But Esmeralda, feeling her world crumbling around her, stood firm. "I want to leave without my children, and I want to let them be left in the dark. What is happening here?" At that precise moment, the hospital's power failed, plunging everything into an oppressive darkness. The silence was broken only by the cries of a newborn, a new life entering a world of turmoil. The emergency lights cast a red glow over the scene, bathing it in an eerie, surreal light. Esmeralda, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, stepped forward, placing herself between the armed agents and her children. "No more secrets," she demanded, her voice quivering but resolute. "I want the truth, the whole truth." Just then, Maria burst back into the room, breathless and holding up a USB drive. "White," she called out, "there is something everyone needs to see." At the same time, in the delivery room, Lucia fought to stabilize Kelly, who had gone into shock after giving birth. The newborn, unnaturally calm, observed the chaotic scene with piercing eyes. "There's something extraordinary about this baby," Lucia muttered, her instincts on high alert. In the nursery, one of the hooded agents stepped forward, removing his mask. Gasps filled the room as they recognized Antonio Vega, the twins' father, long presumed dead. "Esmeralda," he spoke softly, "I never wanted things to escalate this far, but our children are more important than you can imagine." As if on cue, the hospital's doors sealed automatically, initiating a quarantine protocol. Don Alfonso's voice boomed over the intercom. "Attention all personnel. This building is now under my control. No one enters or leaves. The time for truth has arrived." Raul, sensing an opportunity amidst the chaos, attempted to flee but was intercepted by Maria. "Not so fast," she said firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "You have a lot to answer for." The twins, as if sensing the rising tension, began to wail in unison. Esmeralda, torn between the shock of seeing Antonio alive and the primal need to protect her children, felt the world spinning out of control. "What is happening?" she whispered, barely able to comprehend the situation. "What are our children?" Antonio, his voice heavy with sorrow and determination, replied, "They hold the key to saving humanity, Esmeralda. But they are also the reason we are all in grave danger." Outside, the storm intensified, its fury seemingly in response to the revelations unfolding within the hospital's walls. As the weight of this new reality pressed down on everyone present, it became clear that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed Antonio's words was suffocating, broken only by the twins' cries and the relentless roar of the storm outside. Esmeralda, her legs shaky but her resolve unwavering, approached the cribs and scooped her children into her arms as if her embrace could shield them from the harsh truths that were about to be revealed. "Explain yourself, Antonio Ervoli. How is it possible that you are alive? And what does all this have to do with our children?" Antonio sighed deeply, his gaze sweeping across the room as he gathered his thoughts. "Years ago," he began, "I was recruited by a secret organization conducting advanced genetic research. My death was staged to protect you and the project." Maria, clutching the USB drive as if it were a lifeline, interjected, "The data on this drive confirms it. The twins possess a unique genetic mutation that makes them immune to a host of deadly diseases. They could be the key to developing a universal cure. Lucia, entering the room with Kelly's newborn in her arms, added, "This baby is special too." Raoul, cornered and with no escape, finally confessed, "I uncovered part of this. That's why I tried to take the children. There are powerful people who... they." Suddenly, the hospital's monitors flickered to life, displaying Don Alfonso's face. "The truth is more complicated than you realize," his voice echoed through the speakers. "Our family legacy, Esmeralda, we've been the guardians of this secret for generations." The Interpol agents, visibly disoriented, lowered their weapons. "This is beyond any jurisdiction," the lead agent murmured. Esmeralda, the weight of past, present, and future crashing down on her, looked at her children and then at Antonio. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Antonio moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We protect them," he said with conviction, "and decide the future of humanity." Just then, the lights flickered again, and an alarm began to blare. A computerized voice announced, "Attention! Intruders detected on the hospital perimeter." Everyone exchanged tense glances, realizing that their insular world of hidden truths was about to be shattered by the harsh realities of the outside world. The time for decisions had arrived. As the alarms blared louder, panic swept through the hospital. Esmeralda clutched her twins to her chest, her heart pounding with fear and determination. "Who are they?" she asked Antonio, her voice trembling. Antonio, his military training evident in his stance, peered out the window at the chaos below. "They could be anyone," he replied grimly. "Governments, corporations, extremist groups, all of them want what our children carry in their knee." At that moment, the door to the room burst open. Don Alfonso, pale but with a fierce determination in his eyes, entered, leaning heavily on a cane. "I will not let anyone harm my family," he declared with steely resolve. Maria, still holding the USB drive, approached a nearby computer. "We need to make this information public," she urged. "It's the only way to protect them." "No," Lucia cried out, startling everyone. "If this gets out, it will cause unimaginable or illegal experiments persecution." Raoul, seeing a chance for redemption, spoke up. "I know a journalist, someone we can trust. We could leak just enough information to create public protection without revealing everything." As they debated their next move, the sound of helicopters grew louder, the hospital windows rattling with the force of their proximity. Don Alfonso activated a hidden intercom in his cane. "Activate the Omega Protocol," he commanded. "No one enters or leaves this hospital until I give the order." Suddenly, the lights went out completely. When they flickered back on seconds later, a new figure had appeared in the room. Kelly, pale but resolute, cradling her newborn. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice weak but unwavering. "This child, his father, isn't who you think." The tension in the room reached a boiling point as all eyes turned to her. Outside, the storm raged on, a cacophony of sirens and helicopters heightening the sense of urgency. Esmeralda, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility, made a decision. "No more secrets, no more lies," she declared with finality. "We'll face this together as a family." At that very moment, a powerful explosion rocked the hospital's foundations. However, the blast was less destructive than feared a smoke grenade thrown by security forces to create confusion. Smoke began to fill the corridors, adding to the already suffocating tension. Esmeralda, coughing and with tears streaming down her face, clung to her twins. "We need to get out of here," she urged, her voice firm. Antonio nodded, taking charge. "There's an emergency exit in the basement. We can use it to escape." Don Alfonso, regaining some of his composure, spoke up. "I have a private security team outside. They can help us to unnoticed." Maria, still clutching the USB drive, suggested, "We should split up." As they planned their escape, Kelly, still weak from childbirth, approached Esmeralda. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I never wanted it to come to this." Raoul, seeking redemption, offered, "I can create a diversion. I'll buy you the time you need to escape." Lucia, her training as a medical professional and secret agent kicking in, took control. Kelly and the Bobbies need medical attention. We can't risk a hasty escape. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. The tension in the room reached its peak as Esmeralda, with a newfound clarity, made a bold decision. "We wanna run," she declared. "We'll face this head-on. We are innocent, and we have the truth on our side." Antonio looked at her, a mix of pride and concern in his eyes. "It is a risk, but you are right. We cannot spend the rest of our lives running." As they braced themselves for what lay ahead, Don Alfonso made one last call. "Cancel the Omega Protocol," he ordered. "It's time to face the consequences of our actions." The footsteps came to a halt outside the door. The group exchanged resolute glances, united for the first time in a common cause. Whatever awaited them on the other side, they would face it together. The door creaked open slowly, and everyone held their breath, ready for whatever was to come. As the door swung fully open, a group of federal agents entered, led by a stern-looking woman flashing a shiny badge. "Item Special Agent Ramirez," she announced, her voice firm and authoritative. "We are here in response to reports of illegal activities and a national security alert." Esmeralda stepped forward, still clutching her twins protectively. "Agent Ramirez," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "There's a lot you need to understand, but I assure you, we are not a threat." Don Alfonso, leaning on his cane, added, "This is a terrible misunderstanding. We were prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation." Agent Ramirez scanned the room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "We'll need everyone to come with us for questioning. The children will be placed under temporary state custody for their safety." At these words, a wave of panic surged through Esmeralda. "No," she said, her voice firm. "My children stay with me." Antonio moved to stand beside her, his tone calm but resolute. "Agent, we understand the gravity of the situation, but separating the children from their parents isn't the answer." Maria stepped forward, holding up the USB drive. "We have evidence that will explain everything. If you give us a chance, you'll see why we did what we did." Agent Ramirez hesitated, her professional demeanor momentarily wavering. After a tense pause, she nodded. "You have 1 hour to present your case. After that, we will proceed according to the law." As the group prepared to reveal the truth, Lucia approached Kelly, who was still cradling her newborn. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. Kelly nodded, her expression one of quiet determination. It is time everyone knew the truth, no matter the cost. Raul, feeling like an outsider but determined to do the right thing, stepped forward. "I'll go first," he offered. "I'll admit my mistakes and explain how I got tangled up in all of this." As they began to piece together the tangled web of secrets, lies, and truths that had brought them to this moment, the storm outside raged on, a mirror to the tumultuous events unfolding inside. The fate of everyone involved hung by the thinnest of threads, but for the first time they faced it together, united in their determination to protect the innocent and bring the truth to light. As Agent Ramirez and her team braced themselves to listen, the storm outside began to relent, as though nature itself acknowledged that the moment had arrived for truth to emerge. Esmeralda surveyed the eclectic group of individuals who, through fate and circumstance, had become her strange but family. She drew a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever the future might bring, comforted by the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, she was not alone in this battle. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of revelations and confessions, each more shocking than the last. Raul, his voice quivering, recounted how his greed practices had initially entangled him in a web of deceit, only to find himself ensnared in secrets far beyond his control. Maria, with the help of a laptop provided by the agents, revealed the contents of the USB. Documents, emails, and medical records appeared on the screen, chronicling decades of genetic research that had remained hidden from the world. As you can see, Maria explained, her voice is steady yet tinged with gravity. Esmeralda's twins and Kelly's baby possess a unique genetic mutation. It is not supernatural, but it is extraordinarily rare and holds immense potential for medical breakthroughs. Antonio, his voice thick with emotion, added his confession. I faked my death to shield Esmeralda and the research from those who would exploit it. I never imagined things would spiral this far out of control. Agent Ramirez listened intently, her expression shifting from skepticism to astonishment. This is... Don Alfonso, the weight of his actions visibly etched on his face, stepped forward to bear his part of the truth. I used my connections, some of them less than honorable, to fund the research. It was always to protect my family and, in time, to help millions. His words hung in the air, laden with the guilt and regret of a man who had made countless compromises for what he believed was the greater good. Lucia, who had maintained her professional demeanor throughout, revealed her true identity as an undercover agent. He was assigned to monitor the situation because my agency had suspicions, but we had no idea the scope of what was happening here. Esmeralda, who had remained silent as the confessions unfolded, finally found her voice. I understand that this goes far beyond our family. But these children are not experiments. They are human beings who deserve a chance at a normal life. Agent Ramirez nodded slowly, clearly wrestling with the weight of what she had just learned. This is beyond my authority, she admitted. I'll need to consult with my superiors to determine the next steps. As she left to make the necessary calls, the room fell into a tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. They had laid bare all their secrets, and now all they could do was wait for a decision that could alter the course of their lives forever. Kelly, softly rocking her newborn, broke the silence with a voice full of quelled resolution. No matter what happens, she said, her words filled with a sense of peace. At least we are no longer living in the shadows of lies. Esmeralda, hugging her twins close, nodded in agreement. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The hours dragged by in excruciating anticipation. When Agent Ramirez finally returned, she was accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as the State Attorney General. The gravity of the situation was clear in his expression as he addressed the group. We've reviewed your case, he began, his voice resonating with authority, and the circumstances are, to say the least, unprecedented. Esmeralda gripped Antonio's hand tightly, bracing herself for whatever judgment might come. The Attorney General continued, given the sensitive nature of the information and its potential impact on public health, we have decided on the following. The genetic research will be placed under federal oversight, but it will be conducted with the utmost ethical standards and transparency. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but the tension remained. However, the Attorney General added, his tone firm, there will be legal repercussions for those who violated the law. His gaze fell on Don Alfonso, who nodded in resignation. I will accept the consequences of my actions, Don Alfonso said with a quiet dignity that spoke of a man ready to atone for his sins. Raul, pale but resolute, stepped forward as well. So will I, he said, his voice steady despite the fear that lingered in his eyes. Agent Ramirez spoke next, her voice carrying the weight of authority. The children will remain with their parents, but they will be monitored regularly to ensure their well-being. Their privacy will be protected as much as possible. Esmeralda felt an immense burden lift from her shoulders. And the research, she asked, needing to know what would become of the work that had disrupted so many lives. The Attorney General responded, an ethical committee will be established, and you will have a voice in the decisions that are made. The goal will be to balance scientific progress with the rights and dignity of the families involved. Antonio pulled Esmeralda into a tight embrace. This is more than we could have hoped for, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Maria, tears brimming in her eyes, turned to Kelly. Will you be all right? She asked, her voice soft with concern. Kelly nodded, her gaze fixed on her child. For the first time in a long while, I think I will be. Lucia, removing her badge, handed it to Agent Ramirez. My mission here is over, she said, her voice carrying a sense of finality. But if you'll allow me, I'd like to stay, not as an agent, but as a friend. As the group absorbed the news, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the room. It was as if the universe itself was offering a sign that despite the challenges that lay ahead, there was hope on the horizon. Esmeralda looked around at the faces of those who had become her family not by blood, but by the trials they had endured together. Whatever comes next, she said, her voice filled with resolve. "We will face it together." In that moment, within the walls of a hospital that had been both a place of secrets and a crucible of truth, a new chapter began. It was a chapter filled with challenges, but also with the promise of unity, healing, and a future built on the foundations of honesty and love. As the days passed, the hospital, once the epicenter of so many hidden truths, gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. Esmeralda and her twins were moved to a private suite where they could receive controlled visits and the specialized care they needed. Antonio, now free from the burden of his fake death, devoted every moment to his family, cherishing the time he had once feared he would never have. "I never imagined I'd get a second chance like this," he confessed to Esmeralda one afternoon, his voice full of wonder as he rocked their daughter to sleep. Esmeralda smiled, though the worry in her eyes remained. "How do we move forward from here?" she asked, the uncertainty of their future still weighing heavily on her. In another part of the hospital, Kelly was slowly recovering with her newborn by her side. Maria visited her regularly, and an unexpected friendship blossomed between the two women. "I owe you an apology," Kelly said one day, her eyes filling with tears, "for everything I did." Maria took her hand, squeezing it gently. "The past is behind us. What matters is how we move forward together." Meanwhile, Don Alfonso and Raul faced the legal consequences of their actions, both having agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for their full cooperation. They accepted their fate with the quiet resolve of men who had made peace with their past. Lucia, no longer burdened by her undercover role, found herself at a crossroads, both personally and professionally. One afternoon, over coffee with Esmeralda, she confided her doubts. "I've spent so long pretending to be someone else," she admitted, "that I'm not sure who I am anymore." Esmeralda reached across the table, taking Lucia's hand in hers. "You dare our friend, Lucia, and you will always have a place here with us." As the days turned into weeks, the group began to adjust to their new reality. Visits from doctors and scientists became routine, but always under the watchful eye of the ethical committee, ensuring that their rights were respected. One afternoon, as they all gathered in Esmeralda's suite, Antonio proposed a toast. "To the truth," he said, raising his glass, "and to the family we've become against all odds." As the glasses clinked together, Esmeralda looked around at the people who had become so important to her. They had been through hell and back, but they had emerged stronger, bound together by the challenges they had faced. "Together," she thought, a smile tugging at her lips, "we can overcome anything." 3 months later, life had found a new rhythm. Esmeralda and Antonio had moved into a house on the outskirts of the city, provided by the government as part of their protection program. The twins were thriving under the watchful care of a team of specialists, growing stronger each day. On a sunny afternoon, the group gathered in the garden of the new house for a barbecue. The atmosphere was light, the tension of the past few months gradually dissipating. Kelly arrived with her baby, Maria, by her side, their friendship having deepened over time. "I never thought we'd all be here like this," Kelly remarked, her voice filled with amazement and gratitude. Lucia, who had stayed in the city to work as a nurse, nodded in agreement. "Life has a way of surprising us," she said with a smile. Don Alfonso, who was now under house arrest, joined the gathering via video call. His face, though lined with the marks of regret, showed a peace that had eluded him for years. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice carrying through the Fondi speaker, "about using what remains of my fortune to start a foundation, one dedicated to ethical medical research." Esmeralda beamed at her father. "That's a wonderful idea, Dad." Raul, who had been sentenced to community service, arrived later, carrying a tray of desserts. "It is the least I can do," he said, still finding his place in this new chapter of his life. As the afternoon wore on, Antonio gathered everyone's attention. "I have something I want to ask," he began, his gaze resting lovingly on Esmeralda. "After everything we've been through, I have come to realize just how precious time is. Esmeralda, will you marry me? This time with no secrets, no lies, just us, for the rest of our lives." The garden erupted in applause and cheers as Esmeralda, tears of joy streaming down her face, said yes. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Esmeralda watched her friends and family. They had endured so much betrayal, danger, heartbreak, but they had also found redemption, forgiveness, and a new sense of purpose. Maybe, she thought, watching her children play on the grass, our true legacy isn't in their DNA, but in how we choose to live our lives from this moment on. And with that thought, she joined the others, ready to embrace whatever the future might bring, confident in the knowledge that she would never face it alone. A year later, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm for everyone involved. Today, however, was a day of celebration. Esmeralda and Antonio's wedding day. The garden of their home was adorned with white flowers and golden ribbons, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the scene. Esmeralda, radiant in a simple yet elegant gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Don Alfonso, his steps slow but sure, beamed with pride as he accompanied his daughter. Antonio waited at the altar, his heart full of emotion as he watched the love of his life approach. The twins, now almost 2 years old, sat in the front row, watched over by Maria and Kelly. As the ceremony unfolded, each guest reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Lucia, now an integral part of their lives, smiled as she recalled how her mission had led to a family she never expected to find. Raul, seated discreetly at the back, felt a mix of joy for Esmeralda and a lingering remorse for his past actions. But his time in community service had given him a new perspective, and he was determined to make amends. Kelly, with her son in her arms, shared a knowing glance with Maria. Their friendship had become a source of strength for both women, helping them navigate the complexities of their new lives. When Esmeralda and Antonio exchanged their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Their words spoke not just of love, but of resilience, of second chances, and of the strength they had found in one another. During the reception, Don Alfonso asked for a moment to speak. "A year ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought I had lost everything. But today, as I look around, I see that I have gained more than I could have ever imagined. This family, bound not by blood but by choice and circumstance, is my true legacy." He raised his glass. "To Esmeralda and Antonio, to the children who brought us together, and to the future we will build together." As the toasts rang out and the sun dipped below the horizon, Esmeralda looked around at her family. They had been through so much, but they had emerged stronger, united by love and truth. With the sunset marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Esmeralda knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life they had fought so hard to build. And so, with hearts full of hope and determination, they prepared to write the next chapter of their lives, guided by love, truth, and the strength of the bonds they had forged. As we come to the end of this powerful story, take a moment to reflect on the journey we've witnessed. What have you learned from the trials and triumphs of these characters? Think about one lesson or insight that you can bring into your own life. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means everything to us, and we look forward to bringing you more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.